Today's speakers for this upcoming session are, at the far end of the table, Chris Farrell, founder and CEO of a company called Tally. If you haven't heard about Tally, you'll know a little bit more about them by the time this session is over. Tally is a company that is fairly new and it's solving an extremely big problem. Next is Gary Boomer, CEO of Boomer Consulting. And next to me is Jim Bork, partner and director of firm technology at Withum Smith & Brown. So this session is about internal controls, and in particular in regard to accounting for reimbursable expenses. And by reimbursable expenses, that might mean travel expenses, it might mean petty cash, it might mean expenses that you or your colleagues incur on behalf of your clients, or there could be other situations too where you or your staff are getting reimbursed, or you may be dealing with clients who have reimbursable expense situations. And whatever that situation that you're faced with, it's likely that you've spent years collecting lots of receipts and maybe losing receipts or losing track of receipts or trying to categorize receipts. And so let's just kind of kick this off with talking about how messy reimbursable expense accounting can be. Who would like to start?
Well, I'm willing to start, and I think you always have to go back to your own reference point. And I've traveled a lot throughout my career, and expense reporting is something that I certainly have had a lot of experience at. And I think when the spreadsheet came into play, it was one of the first tools that helped automate that. But it's always how you think about the problem, and I try to think about the problem today, not about the tools to solve the problem as much as the amount of time that it takes and the workflow behind that problem. And the tools are fantastic that are out there, but it's not just the technology, it's more the process and who's involved in the process. And taking the cloud into part of the problem today has really allowed us to do things that we were never able to do. You have to think, though, about where people are located. They don't all have to be at the office today to be involved in that process. And I'd just like to have everyone think about that a little bit. In our firm, we have people working all over the country, and they approve those expenses. They don't have to go to the office to approve them. And I just like to have people think here not about a specific tool, but about their process as we start our program today, because it allows you to do a lot of things differently than the way you used to do them if you think differently.
Hey, Gail, when you think about expense reporting in a large firm like ours, it's a huge pain point for our staff. At the end of the month, they're accumulating all the expenses. They're trying to think about all those places they visited, the restaurants, the cabs, the airfare, the hotels, and all that type of stuff. And when you think about it, I think it's our job to try to put the tools in the hands of our staff so they have those tools available throughout the entire month to make it easy. And what are the kind of tools that we're using today? It's all about, right? It's all about mobile. We're all carrying mobile devices. And to be able to put tools in their hands from a mobile perspective that allows them to take advantage and capture those expenses to make it easier at the end of the month or whenever reporting period exists. It's a huge pain point for so many people throughout our industry.
How big a firm is Withum Smith & Brown?
Withum is, we have 13 offices, just about 550 staff spread throughout multiple states. So we have a lot of people on the ground incurring expenses on a daily basis.
And going back, say, a few years, what was the process like for dealing with expense reporting?
Expense reporting has come a long way. I started with the firm almost 29 years ago, and we were using, well, back then we're handwriting expenses. Now we're submitting handwritten expense reports. We then migrated to things like Lotus and Excel and spreadsheets. And many firms out there, I'm sure, are probably still using spreadsheets to capture expenses. They then get submitted to a central point, and then checks physically get cut and issued to reimburse their employees. But we've come a long way. Many of us are using cloud-based solutions today to capture time and expense reporting. So it only makes sense that we use great tools like that and look at mobile to be able to capture expense reporting as it's happening versus after the fact.
So Chris, what was your mindset and your experience that led you to get into the area of trying to solve the problem of reimbursement reporting?
Absolutely. I think, well, I'm an industry guy, right? So I started out at Arthur Andersen, spent a bunch of years as a controller and a CFO. I think when you look at the expense report problem, as Gary and Jim are mentioning, it's a big process problem. There's a whole end user component to it, and then you have the approvers. A lot of the inter-office mail used to have to happen, that kind of thing. Then you have the accountants. I think when you start thinking about the data entry that has to happen at multiple points, right? The end user are typically entering data, the accountants are typically entering data. It's a challenge right there. Then you start adding on the more subtle facets to it. You're trying to close your books. You want to have all of your T&E accounted for. How do you accrue for stuff you haven't seen? So by getting everything into the cloud very quickly and by kind of automating that process, so people are at the point of transaction, they're snapping the receipt, and the data is getting automated, you're able to suddenly shed light on actual T&E the day and month that's happening, right? So you're getting a higher quality close. And then the policing function, I've never met an accountant who really wants to go out there and bang on doors and close year end, right? Saying, hey, get all your expenses in. And then there's a cash flow problem to that too, right? Get to year end, all of it kind of floods in. So when we think about the problem, we're trying to think of every facet of it, right? The end user, the approver, and then obviously there's a heavy emphasis on the accountant.
So it seems to me that, actually, I've got a question that I should probably wait a little bit on, but let's talk a little bit about your thought process and how you actually went down the path of developing Tally and a little bit about what Tally is.
Sure. Well, Tally is automated expense reports. So what we want to do is we want to take the labor out of the whole process. And my last job, we were using Excel. We put a different system in. And the system essentially was like Excel, but it's on the web. So if you think about it, it's form field entry. And we were dealing a lot with, most of our people who were traveling were salespeople. And so when you start putting them on the web and start making them enter data into essentially a ledger, it's a little bit difficult to keep the pace up, right? So when we started Tally, the notion was we can do better. If you actually have accountants who are thinking about the accounting problem we're trying to solve, you might build a different mousetrap. And so Tally really is going to help the end user community grab their data, and we're going to try to do as much of the work for them. So a couple ways we can do this. Take a picture of a receipt, that's common, forward a receipt in via email, or pull the data in off of your credit card, corporate credit card, personal credit cards. You're ensuring completeness and timeliness, right? Which is great. Then we're starting to think about the accounting workflow right after that. So how do you actually learn from the company's chart of accounts so you can start to automatically categorize? Accountants are oftentimes challenged, and managers are too, challenged to identify duplicates. Sometimes you might see a receipt come in and a credit card statement again. Maybe you're overpaying, right? You start looking for that. We started looking for opportunities to present policy issues right up front. So the manager doesn't have to be enforcing, and accounting doesn't have to be enforcing all the policy controls. So we started layering essentially all the functions that are happening right into the product right up front. And that automation is really accelerating essentially the velocity of the entire process.
Business prepaid cards, a new expense management workflow solution. The rise of the business prepaid card stands to revolutionize how employee business expenses are transacted and accounted for. Purchases made directly by employees have been challenging for companies and their employees. Corporate credit cards can invite misuse, and cash advances are time-consuming to account for. There could be a better approach, using innovative business prepaid cards offering pre-purchase spending controls and tight integration with post-purchase expense report systems. Business prepaid cards are a big win for employees who have typically had to float the company's expenses on their own personal credit. Picture the old method of expenses. An employee doesn't have a corporate credit and has to use his personal card or ask for an advance. That might have worked okay in the past, when only a handful of employees could spend on behalf of the company, and almost all purchases were handled through trade credit. Now picture today's solution. A manager has $50,000 budgeted for a critically important company event in a distant city. Her employees need to spend for advertising and promotion, and she has contractors that need to purchase construction materials and rent equipment. Most have some kind of travel expense: airfare, hotels, restaurants, and fuel. She provides PEX Visa prepaid cards to all and funds each card only up to the amount and purpose that each should be used for. As the event approaches, she sees on the Tally website that travel costs are running high, but construction costs are less than expected. Using the PEX Card mobile app, the manager shifts money in real time from the contractor cards to the employee cards. End result? Project stays on budget. Happy project manager. The next day, the project manager quickly selects the project-related charges with their auto-categorized receipts in Tally and submits the expense report. The accountant approves and imports the report into the ledger with just one click. The result? No more missing receipts, no more questionable expenses, no more hours of manual data entry and reconciliation. Happy accountants.
We're here playing with little toys that have been given us by PEX Card, one of our sponsors for this session. And we do want to talk about credit card reimbursement issues. And we were talking about that actually a little bit when we were off camera. And that coupled with the whole changing concept of reporting expenses in such a way where old school, you had to present the original receipt when you wanted to get a reimbursement. And obviously now if you're shooting pictures of your receipts, that's not really the case anymore. So what happens in a modern expense reimbursement environment?
Well, you want to take the...
Yeah, sure. So Gail, you think about how CPA firms bill today versus, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would bill once a month. We would capture all our time and all our expenses throughout the entire month, and then we would send bills to our clients. Well, today, with more real-time reporting of time, we bill throughout the entire month. As jobs leave the firm, as returns, as financial statements leave the firm, we bill timely. So if we're still hung up on the old-fashioned way of capturing expenses, with staff accumulating those expenses on a monthly basis and then submitting them or scanning them or doing whatever, we're not capturing that expense timely, because most of the expenses that my staff incur, we end up passing through and billing through to our clients. So to be able to capture those expenses timely, we need to put the tools in the hands of our staff to be able to do that timely throughout the entire month. Because I want to bill not just their time, but I want to bill all their expenses throughout the entire month.
It's a great problem. I think the velocity in the front end is really taking shape there, right? The big challenge now is how do you get the accountants to keep up? Mm-hmm. I've never met an accounting department that was over-resourced, and I think I never met one that didn't feel like they had to do more with less. And I think that's another additional burden. I know we had Bill.com here earlier today. What we're doing is I think a lot of software companies are now working together to really help the accountants get their velocity way up, right? And so when we think about that, what we want to do is we want to take any kind of data entry they're doing, because essentially it's double data entry, sometimes even triple data entry, getting everything in all the systems. How do you actually get that information to flow through? And there's a lot of talk about cloud. Cloud means there's a lot more elements potentially to have to manage. Those cloud pieces have to start bolting together so the accountant can take data on a high velocity basis, hit a button, review it, then hit a button and get it essentially dispersed. And I think we're starting to see a lot of traction with regard to that.
I agree, and that's why I bring this thinking up, because if you think about the problem from different perspectives, think about it from the staff accountant's perspective today. They don't want to put these expenses on their personal credit card for mileage like some partners may think, and they don't want to put expenses on there and run out of limit and then only get reimbursed once a month. They want to get reimbursed quickly, and they appreciate it when they get reimbursed and have been told their expense report has been approved. For example, today, if an employee in our company turns an expense report in by Monday morning, that it gets approved on Monday. They're notified by email it's approved, and on Wednesday it's in their bank account, and they're notified that it's been deposited. That's so much better, and it takes less time in the back office. The other thing that I would tell any firm of any size is fix your own problems first in your firm before you try to fix the client problems. If you can't do it yourself, don't expect the clients to do it. And it's just a good place to start is in your own firm and work those processes out. It can become a great advisory service because I know we've saved hundreds of hours in our own firm using these tools for expense reporting and bill payment. And the other thing that I would point out, as you get in the cloud, the software integrates and talks to each other much better than it ever did in client-server software. So one of the things the IT people need to know is how to orchestrate these arrangements among different vendors and different applications.
So what about internal controls when you're dealing with expense reimbursement? What are the problems that firms or companies face when they're not automated, and what kind of solutions are they looking at when they do decide to automate their process?
Well, I'll tell you from our perspective, from a large CPA firm perspective, it is currently a very manual process. The verification of those receipts, going through expense reporting. That's why a lot of the technologies that are available out there are helping to accelerate that process, helping in the review process, because the review should be an ongoing process. I keep going back to this, but it shouldn't be after the fact. We shouldn't have to review in our firm 550 expense reports after the fact. It takes a long time. So if we could have supervisors and managers in place throughout the entire month, reviewing and approving expenses as they're submitted by our employees, and as we're passing those through, if they're billable expenses, to our clients, it's home run. Everyone wins in that situation. It pushes the entire process much quicker. And as Gary mentioned, staff love that. Young staff who are traditionally the lowest paid in a CPA firm environment, they like the fact that they're getting reimbursed quicker.
You can set the segregation of duties within the software and the workflow so that you do have different people approving, and you eliminate a lot of the problems that you had in small companies where you had one person doing all of these functions. And if you have multiple offices of a firm or of a small company, you can set that so the owner approves all those bills on their mobile device, and it just takes them a matter of minutes once a week to do that. And so they are much more informed than they were with a paper or a manual system.
I think we've been talking a lot about internal controls. I think there's been some discussion earlier today about client accounting services as well, right? I think when we start thinking about how the service model is really evolving, we don't want to, as Jim's mentioning, we don't want to be approving things after the fact. We want to actually pre-approve. And so think about technology and how it's changing today. A new tool we have in the bag now is the PEX card, for example. It's a prepaid card. And so it can be provisioned on the web. So if you have a staff member who's going to go out in the field, what you would do is you give them a budget. This is your budget. You can load the per diem dollars, whatever it is, on there. And they'll have that. It's a Visa card, so it's accepted everywhere. They'll have it right in their hands, and they can go ahead and start ringing it up. When the dollars come back, we know whatever they spent was approved. And if they're going to go over, they're going to run out of money on the card, right? So the tie-in there to really the client accounting service model is client accounting services, nobody there wants to be enforcing travel policy stuff on the end client. The CEO is going to say, I'm way over budget, going to talk to the client accounting service provider. That's very difficult to manage. So we're getting some really interesting tools in our hands today to kind of get out in front of that.
You know, Chris, that's a great point, because many CPA firms across the country today are going through, how to improve audit efficiency, how to control costs, how to look at hours. But quite frankly, for many of the firms out there, they have staff traveling, they're incurring hotel costs and rental car costs and airfare, and that is becoming a material component of the pass-through to the client. And very often a CPA firm has caps on that. So that's a great way to help control some of those expenses through pre-authorization of those limits, letting everyone know, here's where it's at, here's the caps that we're dealing with. Yeah, absolutely.
And they've eliminated data entry in the process.
Yep.
That sounds like a pretty interesting solution. What else is on the horizon for expense reimbursement in the future? Because a lot of this is kind of new.
Well, I think there's just so much. You kind of pick and poke at any individual element. Personal interest of mine really is in the reporting aspects, because we know that the T&E component can be a lot of times even 10% of the pass-through, right? So you're looking to figure out who's spending the money, where are they spending it, et cetera. In terms of where the money is being spent, we're really interested in essentially normalizing the data. So one trend we think will be big in the next couple of years, actually it's be big this year, is when you take a picture of a receipt, you get a lot of chaff on it. If you go to Starbucks, if you have a Starbucks receipt in your wallet, it'll say Starbucks store number, da 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 da. Well, if we're using essentially dumb OCR, or if we're just using even a human process that isn't standardized, it's going to say Starbucks store number, whatever it is. When you run your reports, you don't care about the store number. You want to see how much I spent at Starbucks, right? Mm-hmm. So one thing we're doing is we've spent a lot of time working on getting a solution in place that will allow us to read the receipt and then normalize the data. So it always just says Starbucks. Same thing on a credit card. A credit card will say Chevron store number, and it'll have a bunch of strange detail after that. What we're doing is we're stripping the extraneous information. So when you run your reports, it's coming through cleanly. So that's just one area of innovation we're really interested in and are pursuing very hard.
That's pretty cool. It seems to me that there's still a certain level of chaos involved in just assembling, especially if you travel a lot, or if you do a lot of expensing on behalf of clients, whatever form that might take. And so dealing with, you may have all the receipts and then you can turn that into an automated process. But talk to me a little bit about the process of, on the spot, getting those expenses as you spend them basically into your expense report and into the reimbursement process.
Sure. I think, really it's all about timeliness, right? Even IRS, I think it's IRS Pub 493 talks about the freshness of data, right? So we want to capture it on the spot. So the notion is, as Jim mentioned earlier, it's about having the mobile device with you, which everybody has now. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be in the field, snap, off you go. What happens in the background is they don't want to have to think about it. So we're going to go ahead and do all the data gathering and the categorization, et cetera. And then we can actually even send reminders out saying, hey, your expense report's ready. Take a look at it, review it. If you like what you see, hit a button, and it's gone. And it's just as easy for the manager. They're going to go in there, and they'll get their email, see all the data, hit a button, approve it, and it's done. So that part's happening very quickly. Back to the point of innovation, though, we're talking offset about how when you're really looking at the industry problem, we know project or management suites are kind of coming in. We can tell where the staff are going to be. We know where they are. We know what projects there are. What if you can start to link that information to the expense report so the data comes in and it's already allocated to the job? So there's a lot of great stuff that's happening. I think the collaboration between industry experts and the software providers is becoming very tight now.
And that is really key, Chris. When you take a look, how often do you walk through an airport and you see people sorting their expenses, sorting their receipts? And it happens all the time. We've all probably been there. But technologies are there today. You talk about snapping on mobile devices. We all have mobile devices. And to be able to snap a picture, snap a photo of that receipt and have it go back office into your time and billing system, into your practice management system, to be able to be accounted for timely, that's huge. Technology is there today to do that. And, so that pain point could easily be eliminated.
Well, and I will just add that we are now seeing some of the practice management vendors, and particularly Practice Engine, that is working with Tally. And before, those vendors mostly wanted to do this themselves, but they are now working with others in the cloud. Until we got to the cloud, there was no way. They said they were open for the APIs to work, but it just didn't work. And now there's been announcements that there will be integration and they will work together. So I think it's very exciting for firms that we're now having new companies that are focused on these problems to help solve. And it's going to be good for the firms to have others out there working on specific problems coming in. We call that the ecosystem. You will probably hear more about some of these other tools, but this is very exciting to me because you're literally spending hundreds of hours a year personally solving these problems that you're not getting paid for. And it'll improve cash flow, it'll improve the experience for the client that you've just had to fight through in the past. And it just took a lot of time.
Yeah, Gary raises a great point about technology's changed, and I think it's really the advent of the cloud and the migration of a lot of our technologies to the cloud. We've seen technologies like Tally, all of a sudden they're appearing, and now what we're able to do, there's more integration between all those different things that we do in the firm, more so than ever before. And again, it was the advent of the cloud, the migration of a number of our technologies to the cloud. Things are starting to talk together, and it's been huge.
I think, to use Tom Hood's parlance, there's been a Cambrian explosion, right, of applications. You think about Gary, a lot of the time, we spent time together talking about the future of the industry and how it's really going to start to work and be more collaborative, and that's taking place. One of the big things I think we're all fighting right now is information overload. Whether you're a buyer, you're looking across a range, too complicated. How do I select from, N providers of any number of these systems, right? Very difficult. So I think what's happening right now is the industry experts are getting together and starting to really help curate the market. I think about Rene Lessert at Bill.com, right? His vision for the App Center there is one solution for each of the core add-ons, really, right? He's rationalizing it for everybody, a takeaway decision, and that's allowing software providers, including Bill.com and Tally, to really emphasize their software development efforts, emphasize their support, because you never want to have a support issue, call in and say, it's not my problem, why don't you call the other vendor?
That's right.
Right, so we're able to cross-train our teams. And so what you're really doing is when you're buying into the ecosystem, you're buying into something that's linked, right? And everybody's going to be accountable for, the health of that ecosystem and the customer experience. So I think that's a really big sea change in terms of how the software providers are viewing the market today.
We've got a question about, instead, we've been talking about accountants and their experiences with reimbursable expenses, but we've got a question now about accountants' clients, and in particular, small businesses, and what kind of expense reimbursement situations those businesses have had, what problems they've had, and how current and future technology can take care of those types of situations. So do you want to kick us off on that?
Sure. I mean, Gail, thanks for reminding me tax season is right around the corner. So some of my worst nightmares about tax season, we deal with a significant number of small business clients. Many of those small business clients have Schedule Cs, they're limited single member LLCs, and inevitably they end up bringing in just boxes of information, summaries of information. And very often, many of them are bringing in receipts and things like that. And we spend a significant amount of time for those clients summarizing that information, using other tools that are available to prepare their tax returns. So think about this. The same tools that we're talking about here from a CPA firm perspective, they're also available for our clients. Why not utilize best practices? And think about it. Clients can end up summarizing those expenses, snapping pictures of those receipts, having those receipts available, because inevitably, if and when a client gets audited, the IRS agent is not going to be happy just looking at a CPA firm's organizer of expenses or summaries on Excel spreadsheets. They're going to be looking for copies of the receipts. And if we could immediately produce those copies of the receipts, home run, right? So, I mean, this is another huge pain point for us during tax season. And what it could do, it also makes us more efficient as a firm. We could end up with higher realization on those tax clients, which we're all looking to do. And at the same time, it's a benefit for our clients because we have that information to represent them in the event of an IRS exam with digital copies of the original receipts. How good does it get? I mean, that's great.
Shifts the responsibility back to the client where it really should be to start with. And it's a free app on their iPad or iPhone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you think about it, Gary, it's, many clients today are using small business accounting systems to capture, and we're getting P&Ls and balance sheets, things like that from our clients, but it's that underlying information. I can only drill down so far, and then that's where there's a break. I don't see those original source documents. That's what I like about technology today. This technology is that now we get to drill down to the lowest possible level. Right there, that receipt from the hotel, from the rental car, from whatever it might be. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, I think we're jumping on it. There's a bunch of pain points here we're talking about, right? It's a tax season overload. A lot of times there's a utilization goal we might be hitting. Might be, you got a new set of employees. They don't want to do any data entry. That's another pain point. Or you have clients who've just been through audit. There's just so many pain points really kind of get the ball rolling and create the need and demand and the urgency to get going.
You sound like an old auditor.
And I would just like to mention that ever since thermal receipts have come on the scene, by the time you get to doing tax returns or 3 years later the IRS is auditing your tax client, those receipts have faded so much that you can't read them anymore.
Thermal receipts. Gail, you're showing your age. I remember those faxes too. Those faxes that used to disappear.
Yes.
Yeah, so you think, to your point, capture it while you still can. Capture it while you can still read it. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, as someone that uses a tally system, I will just say that the process is what the real advantage is. When I check out of a hotel, I have the hotel send the receipt to my assistant, plus the credit card goes through American Express. So we've got several avenues, and they can forward that to receipts@tally.com. That goes into the expense report, and I don't have to touch that again. I've gone from where I would expend at least an hour and a half a week on expense reports to probably less than 10 minutes on an average per week. Now, I know a lot of you don't travel that much, but when you put that in a firm of 40 people, 400 people, or 2,000 people, they're just wasting a lot of time. And then to have people in the back office have to check this, it's a huge savings.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about old school, new school for a minute, and the leadership of firms who have to buy in to a change like this. It's a really huge change to go from a manual expense system or a system where you collect all your receipts and turn those in, and to go to something that's automated. And is there a leap of faith or trust on the part of the leaders of the firms to say, yeah, I think this is going to work, or what happens?
You know what, Gail? You can't say, I think it's going to work. The technologies are there. It is going to work. But you need a great leader of a firm to step up and say, you know what? This is good for us, it's good for our clients, and it's good for all of our employees. Let's take it to the next level. Let's implement a solution like that. Let's have someone champion this solution to make sure that it's rolled out, no questions asked throughout the entire firm. Implementing a solution like this, in my opinion, is no different than implementing any other material technology solution in the firm. good leadership, get a champion, follow through, no exceptions, and just take it to the next level. Gary, I mean, what do you think?
I totally agree. It will work.
Yeah.
You need to decide whether you're going to be here and part of making it work or not. If you decide that you just don't want to do that, then that's your decision. And firms that take that attitude, they succeed on all projects. And it's nothing wrong with the person. They may just decide that that's not for them, and that's okay. But you're holding yourself and the firm back if you take that attitude that we're just going to try.
Right. Best practices, whether you're a small sole practitioner or a large national firm, the solutions that we're talking about, they make sense for everyone. It's not based upon a specific size. It helps to enhance the value of the firm and addresses so many pain points, as Chris had indicated earlier, that exist in the firm today.
I think we're all trying to really lower the hurdle rate too, right? Yeah. The hurdle rate of selection, the hurdle rate of price. This isn't enterprise software, or Gary was talking about on-prem earlier, right? Those, you spend all the money up front, pay maintenance after that. If you bought it and it doesn't really work the way you want it to, well, you're already there, right? I think everything's happening now where the implementation times, we usually have people up and running inside of a week. So it's almost no effort. We do all the trainings. We'll train the staff. We'll train the end users. So we really want to make sure it works. And beyond that, the setup fees are incredibly low. In our case, we charge about $300 to get going on a month-to-month deal. And the time savings, just that alone, should give you immediate ROI. So I think we're trying to just, the technology has moved to the point where there's so little friction that we can start to do these things, which is absolutely unheard of in enterprise-grade software, thus far.
You think about it from this perspective. Firms, and no different than anyone else, you get too comfortable in using your current technology or not using technology. I look at my own kids. I look at my iPhone, and every few days I see new apps popping up on my iPhone because we're all in the same account. I'm like, what is this new app? So they're quickly changing, finding new applications, finding new ways to communicate with their friends, finding new ways to enhance videos, things like that, constantly changing. Something happens to us, I think, as we sort of get comfortable, maybe as we get older, as comfortable with technologies we don't want to change because there's too much disruption. But I think we have to think back. Think back when you were younger. Think back at how quickly technology changes and how quick you embrace it. That, to me, is best practices in a firm. Being able to move quickly as those new technologies come into the marketplace.
Part of it's the compliance training we get coming into the profession. Entrepreneurs figure out how to make things work. Mm-hmm. Compliance training somewhat makes you figure out why things won't work. And so getting the right people to lead these projects is very, very important.
So who doesn't want to change? Who are the people who would rather have a box full of receipts?
I sort of chuckle at that because when we talk about implementing new technology or change, very often, let's say, for example, I'll hear from my partners, and my partners will say, my clients don't want that. My clients don't want that type of technology. Well, have we asked our clients about that technology? What's their take on it? Because quite frankly, I bet you that if you did check with your clients and you say, hey, we're talking about doing this new technology, capturing receipts, capturing expenses, capturing original source documents, right at the source, quickly, timely, I bet you they would go for it. So sometimes those problems exist within your own firm. And it's my fellow partners as well, as many firms across the country. It's your peers. We resist change. We do.
We as a profession.
We as a profession resist change quite a bit.
A personal story, as an auditor, I had to, substantively test a lot of stuff, right? So I remember going out there and literally Oracle's one of my clients. We had to substantively test, meaning hand, foot, using a 10 key, the entire ledger to make sure it was accurate. So doing that, I actually ended up learning how to 10 key left-handed. So, as Gary was saying earlier, in order to get something new, you have to give something old up. Some people we talk to just don't want to give up the data entry part. They're great at it. And we'll talk to people, I'm really good at this. It doesn't take me any time. Well, it probably takes you some time. But anyway, it's kind of one of those, where do they want to give up? Where do they want to go kind of questions.
But Chris, you talk to a 22, 23-year-old today in a firm, you just said a 10 key. They're not going to have a clue what a 10 key was. So that's what I'm talking about because they've moved on to technology. You and I don't know what 10 key is. I did the same thing. I footed receivable agings and things like that because we didn't believe the system had the ability to foot those agings correctly.
Too soon.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, the market is always right. and ultimately the market will drive these decisions, because you're not going to be able to compete if you don't use the right tools. And in the future, you won't be able to compete.
That's a really good point. So besides expense reimbursement, what other types of situations is a product like Tally useful for?
Well, I think, I'm just, you kind of go back and you take a look at, the parts of the business that spend really affects, right? I go back to the PEX card, pre-approvals is going to be huge. I think this is actually going to tie very nicely into travel, because people are booking their own travel soon, or more and more, on the web. Travel agencies still have a role to play, but it might be a little bit less than it was before, particularly for a lot of emerging companies. So I think we're going to see a lot of tie-ins with pre-approval of budget using travel tools. So if I know I'm going to New York next week, I can put that in. It'll give me my hotel budget. It'll give me airfare budget, et cetera, based on the travel rules. And I think we'll see that, and we'll integrate this soon. Those kinds of tools into, for example, a PEX card, so automatically provision after a manager has approved the budget. They'll provision the card. So I think you're going to start to see more tie-ins of the various aspects of administrative work for the entire company and the individual.
And what about petty cash, for example, or what are there other types of expense reimbursement situations that I'm not thinking of that are covered by this?
Absolutely. Petty cash that's got to go, right? That's just it's not much of a control risk because of materiality, but it's got to go. I think we're going to see travel advances, very hard, very difficult to account for. Those are going to go by the wayside. I think we'll see the PEX card eat those up. I also think there are a lot of jobs out there where corporate credit cards aren't applicable. If you have a construction team, for example, you're not going to give them a corporate credit card. It's just not feasible. I think we'll see PEX really rise there. I think they're doing a great job already. Where you have somebody who goes out to a job site, they have some larger equipment needs, they can call in from Home Depot and immediately have their card approved and provisioned with the funds, so they can swipe it and go. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting use cases in and around real-time funding based on need.
I think it's a great concept. I think it's, it goes back to that real time, right? It goes back to the approvals up front, the budgets up front. In a CPA firm, it's natural. We're accountants. We budget everything. We budget every job. We budget every single, every client engagement. And expenses are a key piece of that. If we can control that through the budget process, limit our staff, instead of looking at it after the fact. And very often we look at a job after the fact, we say, how could you possibly have incurred so much time on this job? Or at the same time, the expenses, you guys really got out of control with respect to expenses on this job with hotels and airfare and change fees and things like that. If we can control that in advance, I think it helps to change the mindset. So that's a great concept about, loading it. There's a budget, here's the card. But at the same time, yes, we can make exceptions if things happen. We understand flights have to be changed. We understand that hotels may have to be changed. And you have the flexibility to do that through just a simple phone call back to the home office.
It's a great deal. I think I always go back to, kind of looking at the accountant's role in the company. A lot of times it's a bad guy, right? The CEO doesn't want to go tell the VP of sales to stop spending money. They send in the CFO or the controller or whatever, right? And, nobody signed up for that part of it. So anyway, if we can get everybody away from that aspect, big win.
One more thing. So we're talking about Tally as an expense reimbursement solution that automates and really takes the headache out of all aspects of this process. And there are other products that are in this ballpark, that are in this field, that sort of deal with expense reimbursement. But in general, if a firm has always done paper receipts or Excel spreadsheets or some kind of what we're now thinking of as kind of old-fashioned expense reporting, what's the onboarding process like, or what's the change like if you're going from an old-style process that you've maybe used for the last 10, 15 years into something like Tally?
Well, I'll speak to Tally because our model is a little bit different. Our model really is, we believe in US-based support. We believe in engaging our customers at all levels. So we don't just talk to the buyer, we don't just talk to the managers, we talk to everybody involved. So we want to make sure the end user is comfortable all the way to the point where you push the button and it's interacting with your accounting system. So our model really is, we actually started with customer support, that's what we called it. And we called it customer success because that was kind of trendy. We actually changed it to being product experts because when we bring people in, we want accountants to be able to engage us, and we all want to be able to speak debits and credits, and we also want to be able to speak the systems they're using. So if you're using a Bill.com or a PEX card or a QuickBooks or whatever. We get you in front of the right people. And then we get to walk through really the pain points, we get to walk through the timelines and goals, make sure the fit's there. And if all that works out, what we'll do is we usually, depending on the system, can have something architected, implemented, and deployed in about a week's time. And it's really about the engagement, the dialogue, and that's exactly what we want, because if you start doing that, all the great ideas start popping up.
And Chris raises, that's the one aspect of things. To be able to get things up and running in a week, I think that's great. Changing the mindset in a CPA firm, that's the other side. And that's where we go back to that leadership saying, you know what, this needs to be done. This is going to be good firm-wide, great for everyone. And then again, someone to champion that whole process to be able to take that to the next level.
Were there any challenges when you guys implemented Tally in your firm?
Well, we're in the process of actually looking at that right now. To me, it just makes common sense. It's if we can enhance the experience for all of our staff, if we can capture those expenses quickly, at the same time, we're changing we're giving thought to how we bill our clients. If we're able to bill every single time a job leaves the door, well, staff accumulating time on an engagement is one aspect of it. Staff accumulating expenses related to that engagement are another. So this is a great solution to be able to quickly do that and to be able to pass it through to our clients. So I'll tell you, when we're at that point putting this all together, there will be a no exception rule. That's how we'll capture expenses.
I would just add that Chris and Renee and the people at QuickBooks, the people at Xero, when the top of those organizations have respect for each other and they're willing to get together and talk about the integration, that takes the pressure off of us as users of those products, and they work out the issues. And that's what our people like, is that we don't have to go to different people at lower levels in those organizations to get the issues resolved. And that's why having a users network, or we call them circles, where you have peers you can trust, will give you a lot of confidence. Because if somebody else can make it work, then you figure it's your issue, not necessarily a software issue.
It just makes sense. And when you think about it, it makes sense. We'll get through the process quicker. Staff are happier. We're able to bill and capture everything when we incur the costs. Because I'll tell you, it's so difficult if we sent a bill out to our client and we miss a hotel bill or we miss an expense line item. How difficult is it next month to make up for that, to send that client the bill when they were under the assumption that that final bill, that was everything that captured it? So I think all too often we leave so much on the table by not being super timely with this kind of stuff. And I think it's a win-win. There's no reason why a firm would not migrate down this path to do something like this. Really, seriously.
Well, I think it's just a sign of things to come.
Mm-hmm.
The clients are asking us to set up front and turn around and drive and provide value, not look in the rearview mirror and tell them what they already know and what's happened. Mm-hmm. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be relevant for the future.
But also look at it from this perspective. Firms are always looking for other ways other sources of revenue, other consulting type engagements. Yeah, we all do audits, reviews, compilations, things like that. We're doing tax work. But how about all that other work? You implement a solution like this internally, best practices, then sharing that knowledge with your clients, helping your clients down that same path because you've been there, you've done it. That's a great value add to our clients. We're always looking for, besides the revenue streams, ways to really lock those clients in for life. And sometimes it's the small stuff like this. When you're introducing clients to new concepts that are not tax, not accounting, it's these other things that really help to enhance that relationship.
It reduces the audit risk
Yeah,
significantly.
it does.
Yeah.
That does, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you all very much. This has been an incredible session. I think we've added a lot of value to our attendees, and you guys have all done a great job, so thank you. And thank you very much to Tally and PEXCard for sponsoring this session today.
Thank you, Gail.
Sure.